and we'll start with chapter 1, Shipwrecked. I was lying face down on a soft, warm pillow of sand. I could hear ravens squawking above me, so I slowly shake the fog from my mind. Finally, I muster up the energy to roll over and see what the ruckus was all about. I look up to the sky and my eyes quickly close because of the hot, blinding sun. I could feel my shirt was half torn, and a warm, burning sensation was penetrating my bare skin against the hot sand. I slowly drift off to sleep again, and in no time the ravens flew back down beside me. I could sense their panic as they frantically jump up and down, squawking about, as if to warn me of an impending danger. My mind cleared as I woke again, and although I was wobbly at first, I was able to roll over into my hands and knees and slowly crawl to the edge of the palm trees. I fell a few times on my face, but each time the ravens cheered me on, squawking and jumping the whole way until I finally reached the edge of the palm trees. I was grateful to those ravens, for they had woken me up, I thought to myself, or I would have been burnt toast. The relief of the shade was soothing, and the ravens were gone now. I quickly drifted off to sleep again. In my dreams, I began to recap the events of the last few months. Looking for clues to my current dilemma, I had lost my job and became angry with life. Shortly after that, my marriage fell apart, and even my friends left me. I was depressed and went to see my doctor, and he said my condition was circumstantial and encouraged me to simply change my circumstances. I needed to change my day to day routine or my circumstances, as the doc had said. So I figured a holiday was in order. I had always wanted to go on a cruise, but could never afford one. With only a few $100 to my name, I decided to see if I could line up something. I called cruise line after cruise line, but I could not afford any of them. On my last call, the lady that answered must have heard my desperation. She paused and said, "There is a way. You know how to two step?" They were hosting the first ever tropical on ship country festival, and they were booked completely with 6,000 patrons, but they had not planned the event with enough volunteer dancers. If I knew how to country dance, they could slide me in on a last minute deal for only $199. Meals would be included, and most dancing guests would buy drinks for the volunteers as a tip anyways. I could cruise and eat for a week, enjoy the islands, tourist stops, mingle with new people, and enjoy a few of those tropical rum drinks by the pool during the day. At night, my job was to go out and work as a volunteer dancer at the onboard festival. I was quite nervous the first night on board at the festival, but the rules were simple: dancing only, no personal engagement with guests, and only one alcoholic drink per hour. I would clip on my volunteer badge with my name all professionally embossed on the tag, just like any of the other workers on the ship. We were given 3 sets of country outfits, which we would be able to keep at the end of the festival. I danced with hundreds of guests throughout the week. I noticed in general that the ladies liked country dancing, while their husbands enjoyed the casinos. It was a good trade off, I thought. It carved out a little niche for guys like me. I wonder, could this be my new life? I needed a job somewhere, away from everything back home. Perhaps I will make this my new wish. My team leader on the ship really liked my dancing and offered to waive the $199 fee if I stayed another week on the cruise ship for the second tour. I figured, why not? A few days into the extended cruise, it started raining hard, accompanied by intense wind, lightning, and thunder. All the on ship events were shut down, and everyone was ordered to stay inside. Guests and crews were battling sickness all over the ship as a result of the huge ocean swells rocking the ship. I was happy that I had one of those cheap bottom level cubby rooms, as there was much less back and forth movement compared to the deluxe balcony suites on the upper decks. I laid there in the darkness of the room, thinking about my old life and all its negativity. It seemed like when my eyes closed, my mind would replay the negative moments repeatedly until morning. Suddenly, I was woken from my deep sleep to a loud screech coming from the intercom. Everyone, to the promenade deck. This is not a drill. I quickly got up and made my way up to the promenade level. As I exited onto the deck, all I could see was lightning streaking across the sky and people hurrying everywhere. All I could hear was a roar of the waves as I staggered my way over to the lifeboats. An attendant with a waterproof tablet was checking off names as other attendants were calling them out to him. Most people were already boarded when I made my way over, and the attendant looked at me and the guy next to me. The attendant yelled, "Sorry, gentlemen, we're at capacity and there's only room for one more person. Damn booking agencies, you'll have to flip a coin." When I looked at the guy next to me, I could see he was looking in the boat. I could see he was a father. His wife was crying with his two young daughters, and they were calling out for their daddy from their seats in the lifeboat. I did not see a need to flip a coin. I let him have the last seat. The attendant took one last look at me, then scurried off to the lifeboat and to board the last boat, helping the deckman close the sealed door. I stood there looking out at the black ocean. The air was wild and furious. The waves were crashing against the ship with such force that I could see the water gushing along the deck and down into the lower hull of the ship, causing it to slant. I quickly grabbed a life jacket. I figured I would jump off the ship when the swell was moving out so it could sweep me away from the huge structure about to sink. When the timing was right, I ran to the edge of the deck and I jumped as far as I could into the black ocean. After a few moments, I got my head above water, and with some effort, I was able to grab onto the back ladder of a passing lifeboat. I hung on for dear life as it slowly moved away from the sinking ship. I could feel the water drag from the weight of the life jacket causing the fully loaded boat to alter its course, and the captain was not comfortable with this. He yelled at me, "Let go," because I could not properly steer the boat. The deckman hit my knuckles with the paddles and I let go. I was somehow able to grab a hold of another boat departing from the sinking ship, and this time I was able to grab it securely in the back. And then I woke up, face down, in the sand on this shoreline. Now fully awake, I wondered how I made it to the shore, and where was everyone else? The sun was setting as I rested under the palm tree, trying to regain my strength. I could feel hunger pangs growing inside of me and realized that I wasn't even sure how long I'd been here. I closed my eyes for a moment and heard those ravens land on the branches above. They dislodged a coconut, causing it to drop near missing my head by inches. I grab a hold of it, but then I can feel the pain in my knuckles, from the paddle, I assumed, and then realizing this is not a dream. My hunger cramps caused my hands to override the piercing pain in my knuckles, so I carefully and slowly pick it back. It was leaking a bit, so I peeled back the bark and I sucked out the juice and chewed a chunk of the raw pulp. As soon as the juices hit my stomach, I could feel an instant relief. I look around to see where those ravens went because I wanted to thank them, but they were nowhere to be seen. Soon the sun was setting. The waves swished back and forth on the shoreline. The birds coo in the upper hills, keeping rhythm, putting me into a deep, deep sleep. Deserted. I woke up again, and already the sun beat down on me. About a half a mile down the beach was a canteen boat, like a lifeboat, but stocked with supplies and used for day trips from the ship. I got up and made my way down the beach to the boat, still no signs of people. I was expecting to see lifeboats and people up and down the beaches, but all I could see was waves crashing against the shoreline. There were birds singing all around, and the odd animal sound from the higher up in the hills. I surveyed my surroundings and walked all over the beaches, then rested a while in a sheltered patch among palm trees, and still no sign of people. After a while, I went to examine the contents of the canteen boat. I found cases of canned food and some boxes of liquor. I dragged the canteen boat onto the shore, and that's when I noticed that the propeller was torn off. Here I was on a tropical island with all the liquor and food I would need for some time, and I could even shake down a few coconuts, pineapples, and mix that juice in with my drinks. I had the shell of a boat that was not seaworthy, but at least I could use it as a temporary dwelling until a rescue comes. It had an onboard solar power system and all the conveniences of a small kitchen in a houseboat. At last, my own holiday, I muttered to myself. I'd always wanted one on a deserted tropical island, no people, a tropical beach to myself, and all the best liquor in the world. I would take time each day to relax and soak in a few of the rays, just like my holidays in the sands of Playa, Mexico. Blue water, bathtub warm, and the sun at the perfect temperature with little to no wind, sipping on a nice cold drink of all sorts. I managed to laze around for about a week, and then I thought I had better go inland. The island had to be no more than about 20 miles around, for I could walk it in a good day. I packed up some goods from the canteen and then headed out. I followed the beach until the south point of the island, where a large hill stood in the way of the water and the pebble trail. I followed the trail around a large pillar that led away from the shoreline and up into the hills, disappearing into the trees. It was an easy walk and a steady climb, uphill for about 5 miles, treed all the way. As I emerged from the trees, I found myself in a valley meadow. There was an old farmhouse across the meadow, an abandoned sugarcane farm or something like that. Upon closer examination, a number etched in the wood in the basement read 1982. So it was about 30 years old when I got there. There were no signs of life from what I could see. I surveyed the yard. There was an old water well covered in a shed and an old steel structure storage building with a whole bunch of old parts, tools, and all sorts of junk scattered about with dust all over. The house was very dirty, with dust and cobwebs everywhere, but it looked sound. The windows were tight. The cedar roof did not have any leaks. The outer shell was solid. It was made of fir wood, I suspected, and the floor was light-colored shale like stone. The main living area had a vaulted ceiling with large glass windows overlooking an overgrown and weedy garden with view to a meadow. Overgrown trees blocked part of the view, but I guessed at one time you could see down across the valley. The basement was solid and full of boxes of old clothing, footwear, housewares. First impression was someone left in a hurry, ransacking the boxes for certain items and then leaving the rest. There was an old radio antenna, mast, with an old TV antenna. I thought for a moment the rescue beacon off the canteen boat would be mounted on that mast. The house was hooked up to a diesel generator, but the diesel fuel tanks were empty from what I could see. I thought I could easily dismantle the solar system off the canteen boat and move everything up to the farmhouse and use it as a home base until a rescue comes. This way, the antenna could help the beacon see over the north side of the island. There are a couple old wrecked tractors dating back to the 1940s, I figured. In the long grass, I uncovered some old haying equipment. Good thing I was raised on a farm and I knew what some of this stuff was. My dad was a mechanic, so all of us boys had to learn a few things. My dad could do anything: electrical, plumbing, carpentry. And as a farmer, he had to know a bit of everything to keep the farm running. If only I had picked up a bit more on the mechanics. My younger brother, he became the mechanic. I was more into the low voltage and the technology. I'd already taken inventory of all the technology on the canteen boat, and I thought I could hook up the 5,000-watt inverter up to the electrical panel at the farmhouse, remove the 6 400-watt solar panels off the canteen, and install them on the south wall of the farmhouse. The canteen had a 400-volt, 10-kilowatt Tesla Powerwall, and that would satisfy the power load even in the long, cloudy durations with limited solar. I had to do this because I had to run all the fridges and the lights, if that's how I was going to do it. Within the trees, all growing up around it, I found a 500-gallon tidy tank full of old stale gasoline. I siphoned some fuel out of the tidy tank and got the old farmall tractor running. It took a day or so, but all I had was time. I cleaned the points in the condenser with some emery cloth I found in the shop, just like I'd seen my dad do 100 times on our old farm machinery. I replaced a bad spark plug wire with a piece of hay wire I found in the tin shed. Then I found a plug socket and took the 4 old spark plugs out. They looked good, but they were caked up with old, unburned oil and fuel. I cleaned and gapped the plugs to what I thought looked good. After a few cranks, the old tractor fired on a couple of cylinders. I choked it again, it fired, and repeated this several times, and soon it was rough running. I was able to round up an old chain and clevis so I could tow the canteen boat up the trail to the farmhouse. The canteen tender boat was large, but it had fold-down wheels to enable it to be removed on and off of ship decks, so this process was easier than I thought. The road was quite winding. I noticed different ecosystems with a small freshwater lake off to the south of the farm meadow. There was a small island on the lake, and the water was crisp and clear. About 4 miles down the winding path, just before the tropical zone, there were mountain-sized trees and a large, narrow path around the base of the hill. I thought this had to be the lumber source they used to build the house. I had seen an old sawmill off in the trees. Big circular blade, was all rusted and not used for probably 30 years. Then on the trail there was a sudden drop in altitude, and you could feel the heat and the thickness of the air as you dropped down into the tropical area where the palm trees and the banana trees, pineapple trees, and all kinds of other tropical plants existed. It was a lot of work, but it was a good move on my part, as the canteen supplied food stuff for 3 years. Who would have known? And the other materials from the boat supplies helped get the farm running again. Once I got the tender boat canteen up to the farm, I towed it up beside the house, and then I got busy. I found an old roll of LVT electrical cable in the tin building. My first step was to get the power up and running in the farmhouse. This way the 240-volt AC submersible pump would work in the freshwater well. The boat had an electric motor and a Tesla battery. From the inverter off the boat, I ran 240-volt input into the breaker panel on the farmhouse distribution panel. Now the whole farm had lights and power at all the receptacles. I later would move the fridge into the house, and the boat became my movie theater as it had a large screen TV. The outdoor speakers allowed for music and lounging in the sun on the plexiglass deck. Finally, after a couple of weeks, I got the beacon removed and reinstalled it on the large antenna mast beside the farmhouse. After 3 to 4 days of vigorous cleaning, now I had running water throughout, and I got the farmhouse all cleaned up. I was ready for a party now, but I muttered, "Where are all the people?" Chapter 3. A Woman. Days went by, and then weeks. Loneliness and negativity set in. I lived in my head, and I wandered about the farm aimlessly. I started drinking and smoking heavily from all the supplies in the canteen boat. My mind was full of so many negative thoughts, so I would crank up the music and try to drown out my negative thoughts with noise. The louder, the better. I even dismantled the subwoofer from the inside of the canteen and rigged it up outside to get a full, high-quality effect from my rock music. It was a vicious cycle every day. I spent months alone on the island, and about half the time my thoughts were horribly negative. It was the easiest way of thinking. I started to rant and rave the drunker I got. Not a proud moment of my life. It was June 21st. I remember the early morning. The sun rays were intense that morning, and those ravens were outside again, tearing into the garbage. I had a headache from drinking the night before, so I thought I would walk it off. It must have been 6 in the morning when I started walking in my normal trail. And when I got to the fork in the trail, a couple ravens flew out of the trees in front of me, and I had to sidestep to the left to miss their swoop. I wondered what was wrong with them. I kept going left on the trail to miss their ruckus. It goes away down to the south point of the island. a route I had not taken for a long time. I'd walked along the beach for a mile, it being like a big sandbar. My mind started to daydream as I walked, and I thought about home again. I wondered why I haven't even seen a plane fly over. I decided to keep walking and check the sandy beach out on the south point, where the morning sun is rising about now. It will only take a few hours to walk there. I haven't tried that route for a long time either. Who knows? Maybe the ravens were onto something. I must be picking up some spiritual roots or something on this island, thinking the ravens are giving me signs. As I walk along the beach, it seems to stretch out along the island for miles. I loved the white sand. It was so good for the soul. The dew was rising, and I could see heat waves dancing up and down off the shoreline in the distance, with a ribbon of green against the blue ocean. The day was blissful. As I walked, I scanned the sand for clues to life, like footprints and anything, but there was nothing. I looked up briefly and then back down to the sand, and then I stopped sudden in my tracks. What was that up there in the distance? I could see what looked like a ballerina dancing on the edge of the shoreline. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. It was a person, or maybe an animal, on 2 feet. I couldn't quite make it out. My heart was pounding harder and harder, so I dropped to my knees cautiously and slowly. I crawled up to the edge of the shoreline, being swallowed up by the tall, lush greens to avoid being seen. What should I do, I wondered. As I regained my breath, I crawled over to the trail just inside the trees. The pebbles on this path looked so polished, as if it had been traveled for 1,000 years by an army. I crouched along the trail and made my way closer to get a better look. As I got closer, I peered out of the tall grass and saw a young-looking lady. She was twirling around on the beach. I watched for some time, but as I lost my eyeglasses at sea, I couldn't quite make out the fine details. I stared closer, and suddenly, ouch, 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 red ants were crawling up my leg and biting me. I jumped up and yelped, giving away my camouflage. I went running out of the grass like a mad bull and straight into the water for relief. When I turned to look at the lady, expecting her to be startled, she wasn't even looking at me. She just reached down and picked up another starfish off the shore and threw it into the water. There were thousands of them all over the beach for as far as you could see. I washed away the rest of the ants off my legs in the water, then slowly walked up to her. She paused for a moment and looked at me as if she were expecting me. I could see wisdom in her eyes. My heart was beating faster and faster, and I wondered who, where, and why all at once. I broke the silence. I choked a bit and cleared my throat to say, "Hello, my name is..." "Hello," she replied in broken English, and she looked toward me briefly. Her skin looked so soft in the light. Her eyes were awesome. They absorbed me into her instantly. "What are you doing?" I asked, as she bent over and picked up a starfish. She replied, "The starfish will all soon die, as the sun rises higher in the sky." I looked around at the many hundreds of them. Without even thinking, I blurted out, "You're not going to make a difference." She was silent as she looked down toward the water, and she threw in the starfish from her hand back into safety. I immediately thought to myself, what a stupid thing for me to say. She reaches down again to pick up another starfish, holding it for but a brief moment, looking at its beautiful shape, stroking the top of the fish, and she said under her breath, "I'll make a difference to this one." And she gently tosses it out into the water. Her eyes turned green as she gazed at the water, and back to hazel when she looked at the sand shoreline. Her hair was black, with the red tone from the top of her head to her shoulders. The bottom part of her hair looked like a deep burgundy scarf, blowing in the light breeze. I could see her cotton top was torn on the shoulder, exposing a tattoo, and taunting me to look further. She caught my eye, and I blushed. She smiled with a little mischief. Within an hour, we had saved hundreds of starfish that day. What a good feeling. I stood up to straighten out my sore muscles and stretch. I guess I got soft, I exclaimed. I hadn't done that type of work since I had landed on the island. I was always drunk and waiting for a rescue. I was not expecting to meet anyone. It appeared that she did not talk a lot, but she'd studied me as we kept a steady pace along the beach. I had never been around this part of the island before. I always thought the big rock cliff was the end, but there was another world on the other side. Nestled in amongst some huge palm trees was a small old cabin that I didn't know existed. Her cabin was cozy inside. The ceilings were low. It smelt like cedar chest and flowery fragrances that I had never smelled before. She took my hand and led me over to a small couch, adjusted it flat and turned it into a small bed, and then gestured me to lay down. As I sat on the bed, she lit candles, for the sun was setting. Every muscle ached, but I forgot about the aches when she came out of her kitchen with the most amazing smelling bowl of something. It was a combination of vegetables, herbs, and spices, and it tasted meaty. It was exactly what I needed, and it tasted great compared to all that preserved food I'd been eating from the lifeboat. All I had eaten that day was rum and fruit juices from the canteen. I finished eating, and she took my bowl. I followed her through the kitchen and then outside into her yard. We later walked on the beach and watched the sunset on the water before it finally sank into the ocean, leaving a dark red glimmer across the water and a red streak across the horizon. She studied each ribbon of the sky with great interest and finally said with conviction, "The red sky tonight will be a sailor's delight." Will it be calm? I asked. It will have a certain wind to the air that will not leave a sailor stranded at sea, she says, and the sky will not give a storm causing grief. I thought for a moment, like reading the Farmer's Almanac. I found myself attracted to her energy. Her eyes were so inviting, and her soft half smile made me want to know her even more. The backyard was full of fragrance, shrubs of all sorts and sizes, herbs of all types. Some had fruit and others had flowers. It was a hidden little paradise, and I was instantly in love. My old life was gone. All the worries, the pain, the sorrow had vanished. All I could think about was this beautiful person in front of me, and I was no longer alone. Chapter 4, Love. Days turned into weeks as we fell in love. She slowly improved her English as we studied my facial expressions and matched them to words. Once we mastered basic language barriers, we could share life stories with each other. Even though the island appeared to be in the tropics, up in the hills we experienced seasons. Suddenly, fall was upon us, and we decided to spend the winter up in the old farmhouse away from the open water. My job was to pull in firewood for the winter months, while Amalia would prepare the home for the winter. We took an inventory of the canteen goods and brought them into the basement for storage. I was able to dismantle the refrigerators from the boat, and we moved them into the basement as well. The boat outside became a shell that housed the solar system and batteries. I had to eventually move the batteries inside to avoid damage from the cold weather. I was able to relocate the boat's stereo and speaker system to the farmhouse. The solar system was connected to the breaker panel, making that an easy transition. I spent most of the winter monitoring the radios and ensuring the beacon was working on the top of the mast. My primary goal was to get rescued, and so I waited and waited and waited. Throughout the winter months, we played cards and various games we had found in the canteen in the old farmhouse. We spent many hours watching hundreds of movies from the relocated boat entertainment system. It contained a built-in library of movies and music videos of all sorts. The canteen had liquor, so I could drink away the months until finally spring came. All the snow was melting high up in the hills, water was flowing vigorously, and the grass was finally greening. I became impatient with no rescue and started to take it out on Emilia with sharp and cutting remarks. One time she just left. I wandered about the farmhouse aimlessly for days, wondering if she'd ever come back. She came back with a bunch of herbs and plants from her cabin, and we started to build a garden. In time, we domesticated some little bantam chickens that were wild. I would spend most of my mornings hunting for nests of eggs. One day, a wild horse approached, and Emilia just reached out to the mare, and she came over and muzzled up to her. When I walked over, the horse quickly pulled back and scurried off to a safe distance. It started to graze at a distance from me, but it stayed around and bonded with Emilia. This was a very magical time for us together. We only had each other to rely on, and we had an excellent relationship for the many hours we spent together. One day I was curious and I asked her how she bonded with the wild horse, and she said that the horse is connected to our energies and can sense our fear, and so will keep its distance. She told me that her people believe that a horse is a part of God, and that God sees us through the animal's eyes. All I had to do was look. And so I spent a lot of time gazing into the mare's eyes over the summer, wondering if I could see God. But I could not. I could only see a horse's eyes. Over the summer, our whole valley was full of wildflowers and herbs indigenous to the island. They formed the most beautiful meadow one could ever dream of walking through. Various flowers would bloom throughout the warm months, always bringing color to our lives. One summer day I was fishing inland at a small freshwater pond we called Fox Lake. I'd already walked a couple of miles back to the farm when I noticed a little pup following me home. I presumed its mother had died or abandoned it, so we raised the pup and named her Lucky Lady. She became part of my spirit animal world. We became playmates and friends as we would do our daily chores together, and she would be my sidekick on every adventure on the island. Lucky Lady was great at finding hidden wild chicken nests, so she made my job gathering eggs much easier. I noticed my connection with my new companion increased with positive energy as we worked side by side. We trained and nurtured the new animals we were adding to the farm, and soon we had hundreds of wild chickens, peacocks, 2 horses, 3 mini goats, and 21 ducks. Emilia said all the animals we make friends with give us the same friendship back. If we show them love, we get love back in various ways. Emilia warned never to mistreat an animal, or we will be mistreated back. It's God's rule, she would say. One day, a baby panther came to our farm, lost from its mother, and Lucky Lady became its new best friend. They chased each other and played tag together, creating a bubble of laughter throughout the farmyard. Our lifeboat canteen was running low on supplies, and we started to rely more on the fruitage of our gardens we were now planting. We had an excess of eggs, potatoes, and many vegetables that we produced, so we used the refrigerators to freeze the food that helped get us through the winter months. I still was not sure how this woman came into my life. She was perfect for me in every way, shape, and form. Could I be in some other world, I wondered, and this was just my imagination? My mind would often try to make sense of all of this, and any time I tried to talk to her about it, she would just redirect me to the present and tell me to enjoy the journey. When I got angry, she would disappear into her garden, and when I calmed down, she would return. I felt like I was always saying sorry. I had little patience and a chip on my shoulder from my past life.